Canna plants are often referred to as Canna lilies, and they put an incredible display on in gardens right from spring through to autumn with their enormous leaves and bold tropical flowers. In this video, I'm going to give you the ultimate care guide to help get your plants through winter, including lifting the rhizomes, dry storing them, and spring propagation before planting out to enjoy the display all over again. As autumn approaches in your garden, cannas will start to get frosted back by the first cold weather. At this point, I recommend cutting back the season's growth with a sharp, clean pair of secateurs, and that's going to prevent any rot spreading down over the canna rhizomes. Now, the two best ways to overwinter cannas if you're somewhere with cold and wet winters is, number one, bring your pot into an area that's under cover and is frost-free. So in this greenhouse here, we heat it to 5 degrees Celsius just to keep the frost off. I will tuck this canna plant in its pot underneath a bench and it will be kept dry. I will allow it to completely dry out, and then when spring arrives, you will see new shoots start to emerge from the top of the pot, and that's a sign that it's ready to start watering, or if you want to, you can divide the canna rhizomes to create new plants, and I'll show you how to do that a little bit later on in the video. The other option, if you are somewhere where you want to grow canna plants, but it's very cold and wet and maybe you don't have a greenhouse or somewhere to store them in the pots, is to lift the canna rhizomes, whether they're planted in the ground in your garden or you're growing them in containers like this. I'll show you how to lift them and store them dry. Now, the first thing, let's say we've lifted these from the ground. They would look much like this, maybe a little bit wetter, maybe a little bit more wildlife in the pot. But in a container like this, we treat them exactly the same. Now, to store the canna rhizomes dry for the winter months, you want to get off as much soil as possible. Now, a nice easy way of doing that is just tapping the root ball. Now, at this stage, you could divide them and break them apart, but I find keeping them as big as possible in the winter months really helps increase their survival rate. One complete plant with all of this underground storage organ, the rhizome, is going to be much more resilient to being put into dormancy in winter, which is what we're doing when we're storing them dry. Now, you might be tempted, when you're clearing off all of this soil and compost, you might be tempted to hose it down. I would avoid that, just because our goal here is to dry the plant out. So soaking it with water isn't going to do us any favours. So I'm just brushing it like that. And that's pretty good. We've got all of the rhizome exposed. The new shoots there, they'll die back or dry out. And we've cut back any soft material. I'm happy with that, so that one's ready to store. Let's clear some of this away and see if we can get some more out from the material we had in that pot. So this bit is feeling a bit wetter and a bit softer. So if there is any rot, and you can tell because it's always super soft, we can just throw that piece away. So this rhizome here is nice and firm, but these bits feel a little bit soft. So I'm just going to cut those back. And then you can see we're back to healthy material there. Perfect. Just be patient with it. You don't want to hit it too hard because you could bruise the plant tissues, and that's just going to cause rot, which is exactly what we're trying to avoid. Perfect. So we've got good rhizome here. It's a dark rhizome, but it will green up when it's ready to grow. We've got all the roots that we'll keep intact. They'll dry out, but some of them may regrow in spring. Then it's just time to dust it with something called yellow sulphur and then wrap it in paper and we'll store it over the winter months. I like to use these stackable vegetable crates. You can get these from farm shops, from just local retailers. Sometimes they've got them to give away, so it's always worth asking, but they're great because they stack. So if you are dry storing roots like this, and you've got very, very limited space, perhaps you're doing it behind a cupboard or under the stairs or in your porch, you can just stack a few of these up and you can store things like dahlias, ornamental ginger lilies, anything that's bulbs or rhizomes that's a little bit tender that you need to protect through winter. So what I do is I will just get a sheet of old newspaper, like this. I will then get my Canna rhizome and place it onto the newspaper. Now, you can use something called yellow sulphur, which is this. This could be used for acidifying soil. So if you're growing things like camellias or plants that love acidic soil, you can add this to the root zone and that will acidify the soil. But it also prevents pests and mold forming on plant material. So what I do, and I really like this bottle because it's got a tiny little hole, so it's great for dusting it around, is just puff it about on the rhizome, over the top, really get in and amongst the roots, like that. And I'm doing it over the paper, so when I wrap it in a minute, it's all covered. And you can see there, it's got a really good coating of yellow sulphur. And then, oh, we don't want the pencil to go in there. And then all I'm going to do is wrap this up, just loosely, and sit that there. Now the great thing here is paper is breathable, so moisture, any moisture left in those rhizomes can evaporate out. The crate has holes in, plenty of holes on the side as well, so it can evaporate out of the stack if we've got multiple crates. And I do them individually, rather than on one big piece of paper with all of the rhizomes in one thing. Because if one rhizome starts to rot, that damage is isolated to that root, that rhizome, and it doesn't spread to the others because there's a barrier, a physical barrier between them. I'll put a link to this yellow sulphur in the video description. It's really good stuff for propagating with. As I say, just because it prevents rot. And it once again, just fold that over, just very loosely. And then I will just fill this up and stack them up and put them somewhere house temperatures, so somewhere between 15 and maybe 22 degrees Celsius. That just prevents them rotting, prevents them completely drying out. And for the 3 to 4 months-ish, let's say November to March, they should be absolutely fine. November, December, January, February, March. Okay, 3 to 5 months. The key with overwintering Canna rhizomes like this, or any rhizomatous plant that you are going to overwinter this way and store dry, is to reduce that period of time by as long as possible. So if you don't get frosts until very, very late in the year, leave the plants outside, let them thrive, let them continue growing, because they don't want to be treated this way. This is just how we're doing it because we're trying to grow them in conditions they're not really going to be happy in winter. Pot them up as soon as you can in spring and allow them to grow. The shortest amount of time they can be in this state, the better, and you will have more success overwintering your cannas this way. My favourite is just leaving them in a pot because that part of the plant, in my eyes, is supposed to be underground. So if you've got somewhere like a greenhouse, a conservatory or a porch where you can keep that plant in its pot and just keep the soil dry, I think it's going to be much happier. But I've had good success doing it this way too. So if you have lifted your cannas and successfully stored them dry in pots over the winter months, what we're going to do at this time of year, that's late February, early March, when you start to see signs of growth appearing, is to lift and divide our Canna rhizomes. Now, inside of the pots at this time of year, you will see that there are growth points emerging. That's because daylight hours are getting longer, the temperatures are rising slightly, so things are looking ready for propagation. So we're going to start with this one. We've got two types here. This one is Canna tropicana black, because it's got these really nice dark leaves and bright scarlet red flowers late in the year. So to start the process of dividing our Canna rhizomes to propagate lots of new Canna plants, we're just going to tip out this pot. Now, I can feel straight away there is some really good root growth in this pot. Cannas are really, really good. If you feed them through the year with a good balanced fertiliser, ideally organic, chemical-free, they'll put on a lot of growth. There you are. And you will get lots and lots and lots of healthy root formation. And you can see here, this is exactly what we're looking for. These underground rhizomes. Now, rhizomes are actually an underground stem that runs horizontally to allow the plant to propagate itself and send up more growth points, more leaves and more flowers. And it's this mechanism by which cannas multiply that we are going to utilise to divide these plants and get more plants for free. Now, at this point, let's just get that pot out of the way. I'm just going to tap this just to loosen up that root ball. Gently, using my thumb, split some of the cannas apart. Now some, like this one, which was a beautiful demonstration, come apart really, really easily. You've got enough of the rhizome here to have energy to enable this to grow into a new Canna plant, a standalone plant. It's got roots that are ready to grow away, a really good amount of roots there. And it's got one growth point. Now, I'd say ideally, aim for two. One growth point is absolutely fine. This will grow away, it will continue to grow away, and it will send out more rhizomes, and it will become an established clump like this within the next year. But two just means you're going to have an even bigger plant even quicker. But that is a nice division there. And I'm going to keep going, just teasing it apart. You can use something like a sharp kitchen knife. Bread knives work really well to cut down between these underground stems. There you go, you can see there's another growth point here, just coming up through the roots. And we've got old growth here. Now, I always recommend getting rid of the old growth. It goes soft and it starts to rot. So if we cut that back, use a nice sharp pair of secateurs. If we cut that back, there you go. So we're back to a clean part there. There's no rot. And let me see if we can get any more pieces out of this. So it's really important to remove as much soil as you can, because it's going to help you see much more clearly what you're working with. Okay, so here we've got the previous season's growth that I've just cut back. We don't want that. We've got this season's growth point here and here. I think I'm going to leave this one as it is. Yeah. So I'm going to sit that there, put the old piece over here, and then I can see we've got at least two more good growing points here. So again, just knocking off all of that compost. There's an old bit of Canna rhizome here. I don't want that bit. Okay. So just being brave and pulling it apart, we can see again. Now this bit looks old, but if you look closely, there's actually a growth point starting to emerge here. That little eye formation, that will be a new shoot as the weather warms. So what I'm going to do is just cut that back there, and I'll allow this to grow. We've got enough roots on this. I think, yeah, we can get another plant out of that there. I'll get rid of this piece. And then down here, again, knocking off a bit more compost, I can see we've got this shoot that's trying to come up. We have an eye here, ready to grow. Then we've got the rhizome running out and horizontally here with another shoot ready to go. And yeah, I reckon we'll get more eyes appearing here. So I'm going to cut this here. There we go. One piece of rhizome. And the piece we cut here will have growth points and this new shoot and its own roots. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and at least one more here. Again, I'll cut back that old growth, don't need that anymore. Put that in that pile. Let's knock this back and see if we can cut this up any more. Okay, with this piece, I think I would recommend just keeping that as it is. We've got one growth point there. I can feel there's good hard rhizome here. There's no rot that's kicked in through the winter period. That's ready to be potted on. So we've managed to divide that one larger pot into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 separate plants ready to pot on. Now with Canna rhizomes, Cannas love good drainage. If they are too wet in the root zone, they're going to rot away, especially when they're dormant, when they're not actively growing. In the warmer summer months, they're growing a lot more, so they can take and tolerate a lot more water, and some Canna species actually grow as aquatic plants in ponds. But at this time of year, early spring, late winter, when we're dividing our plants, we still want them to have good drainage. We are going to start watering a little bit more because that's going to encourage them to grow. But good drainage is important. And for that, we're going to use perlite added with this peat-free multi-purpose compost. So I'll just grab some of that now. So this is perlite. It's just a really good lightweight medium that opens up compost, helps water drain away really, really quickly. And it keeps pots nice and light too. So if you're growing a really big display of Cannas, this will mean the pot doesn't get too heavy. Okay, I've mixed that in nicely. So I'm going to use a 9cm pot for the smaller pieces of rhizome that we've got, like this individual piece here. So I'm just going to fill it up part way, pat it down, stick the rhizome in, making sure the root is facing in the right direction. So root down, growth points up. Might sound like common sense, but it's just helpful to point these things out, especially if there's beginner gardeners here. I don't want these videos to be just for experienced gardeners. I want everybody to be able to have access to growing these amazing plants. And then just firming it down, tapping the side every now and again, just helps the soil move down around the Canna roots. And then it's okay if you've got a tiny bit of shoot popping up at the top, that's absolutely fine. This is where the new growth is going to emerge from. So that's not a problem at all. Then that is one Canna plant with its growth point just visible, ready to grow away as the weather continues to warm in spring. Now for larger pieces, like this, with multiple growth points and a much bigger, massive roots, I'll use a bigger pot, something like this. This is a recycled pot from our nursery, made up of recycled materials. And we use these taupe coloured pots because when you're ready to recycle them, if they break, you can recycle these from home in the UK. You don't need to go to a special location. So I'm just going to, again, repeat the process, fill this pot up halfway, sit the Canna rhizome in. This is how the plants get bigger and healthier when you divide. It adds vigour into plants. So the Canna plant is now going to have so much more fresh soil around it, full of nutrients to feed lots of new growth. And it's got space to send out more rhizomes and send out more flowering shoots. That's what we want. Plants can sometimes get a bit tired. If you leave them in a pot like this, you can see it's crowded, it's running out of room for nutrients. There's not much room for water to be held in the pot, so it's going to dry out really quickly. Whereas this is going to make a happier, healthier plant that's going to be a lot easier to keep watered and to keep looking happy and healthy. So I'm just going to get lots of that perlite enriched compost in and around the rhizomes and the roots. There we go. And that is another Canna tropicana black plant ready to grow away in spring. You've got the shoot coming here. This shoot that's been trying to grow quite early in the year, so it's been touched by cold, but it's still pushing up through. It's ready to go. Now with them potted like this, I'm just going to give them a little water, but not too much water. Like I say, they're just coming into growth, so you don't want to drown them at this time of year. They will tolerate a lot more water when it's hot summer weather, but not at this time of year. As you see more and more canna shoots emerging from the soil, start to feed and water more regularly. I'd recommend feeding once a week, and you're going to encourage big healthy leaves and strong healthy flowers. If you can keep the pots inside of a warm location earlier in the year, you're going to give them a head start with growth, as most cannas flower in autumn or in late summer. The earlier you can get growth started, the earlier in the season you're going to be able to enjoy those flowers. And that's it. That's how I recommend you look after your canna rhizomes in winter if you are somewhere that's too wet or too cold to leave the rhizomes in the ground. Thank you so much for watching, and if you found this video useful, please hit subscribe. It's the easiest way to support the channel. I'll see you in the next one.